Now, India broke the record for the most number of satellites launched into space this week. The country launched 104 of them on a single rocket. In a moment, we'll talk about the implications of India's space program in a country where more than 250 million people live below the poverty line. But first, here's some of TRT World's Ben Tornquist's report.
2, 1, 0, plus 1, 2.
A countdown to an historic record. India's PSLV rocket carried 104 satellites into space, along with the pride of millions of Indians. In less than 10 minutes, all 101 foreign-owned satellites were released into space, each travelling at a whopping velocity of 27,000 kilometres per hour, or about 30 times the speed of an average passenger plane. But of the 104 satellites, only 3 are Indian. India sold space for 600 kilos on its rocket for more than $100 million, making it one of the most commercially successful launches ever. The agency's relatively low prices attracted international customers to launch 75 satellites through it last year, cost around 20 to 30% less than the Chinese launched satellites.
Well, the lawyer and broadcaster Andrew Kidd is with me, also the journalist and communications consultant Nicola Hill. Andrew, this is a success for India. They seem to be being very good at launching just stuff for their own program, but also for offering the service of lifting satellites into orbit for other people too.
Absolutely, this is a really successful showcase for India. Let's remember half of the money needed for Wednesday's launch was privately sourced.
Yeah.
So this is really a fantastic event for India, for its national pride, for showcasing its space program, and I think it just shows that they can do things cheaper, they can attract external investment, and their space program is credible and building.
It's interesting what they're doing with all these things. Most of them are taking photographs, so maybe we should be suspicious as to what they're really about.
It's certainly a worry, isn't it, that you do think there's so many satellites sort of bobbing around, keeping an eye on us the whole time. My understanding is that these are micro and nano satellites. I don't know how big that means, I've no idea.
Very tiny, I think.
Yeah, obviously. I think they're like LED lights. Now, I was told they're in something called low Earth orbit, and there have been lots of accusations that people are littering space with junk, but these ones apparently decay and disappear. I don't think it's going to be a case like we have with all our plastic bottles in the oceans, because, I mean, there have been criticisms, haven't they, about the sort of like
space debris.
Yeah,
They do have to deal with space debris, don't they, when you're
Yeah.
deploying these things. So there's an awful lot of stuff that, as you say, just sits there and stays there forever unless it's deployed. These have the decaying. But the photographic capabilities are quite extraordinary when you put it all together, perhaps not just for internal reasons like mapping and so on and so forth and civilian use, but also, as I understand it, they'll now be able to have a very good look at what's going on in neighbours in Pakistan, which of course the Indians like to keep a very close idea what's going on there, but also China too. So the ability to everyone to watch everybody else, I suppose, is just there to be enjoyed by.
Yes, whether there is a disingenuous motive to all of this, Martin, there may well be, but there is a perfectly benign use to these satellites. There can be weather observations, topography, but there can be a military element. So, yes,
we're not likely to find out, are we? I suppose.
No.
Kembley in London. Thanks for joining us as we go live to the Sri Harikota Space Centre in the southern Indian state of Andhra Pradesh.
Minus 30 seconds.
Real-time programs activated.
Roger. Minus 25 seconds.
PS2 VSPPs are opened.
Minus 20 seconds.
And we are here because they're
15
just about to
seconds.
launch a rocket carrying a record number of satellites into space. That's 104 satellites on a single mission.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of normal, 7, 8, 9, less than seconds.
Perfect liftoff, as usual for PSLV.
There it goes. In fact, this mission carrying only 3 Indian satellites. Most of the load here is nanosatellites from other nations, including 96 from the United States. The previous record holder, a Russian mission which put 37 satellites into orbit just a few years ago. Let's go live to Delhi now. The BBC's Sanjay Majumdar has been watching the launch. Sanjay, this is a big moment for India.
Absolutely, Mike. As you know, India has had a very successful space program. It's really created a reputation for being a very reliable space launcher, but a low-cost alternative to existing international players. And I was speaking to people yesterday, people who follow sort of space science very closely, and they were trying to explain to me why this launch was so significant. It's not just the fact that it's so many satellites up on one rocket, but the fact that it's so complex. You have to ensure that even though these are very small satellites, that they don't collide while they're being launched. It's a very, very complex procedure, and that's why everyone associated with the launch, the scientists, have been so anxious about it.
Yes, I know India has been pressing ahead. This whole business of putting commercial satellites into space for a fee has been growing, hasn't it? China and Japan.
Yes, that's right. Many people are saying that if it was the Russians and the Americans in the 60s, well, now it's the Indians and the Chinese, really, who are the new sort of space rivals, if you will. If you remember, in 2013, India sent a satellite to Mars at a fraction of the cost of a similar satellite that was sent by the United States, by NASA. I think it was a tenth of the cost. And there was a joke that, the Hollywood movie Gravity cost 4 times more than the Indian satellite launch. And it really underlines how strongly India's sort of approached this whole lucrative commercial market, basically allowing countries to take advantage of its technology, but also the fact that it's being offered at a very, very competitive price.
Sanjay, thank you very much for that. Those pictures on your screen now, live from the Sriharikota Space Centre in the southern Indian state of Andhra Pradesh. They've just launched a rocket carrying a record number of satellites into space, 104 satellites on a single mission.
We are here because they're just about to launch a rocket carrying a record number of satellites into space. That's 104 satellites on a single mission.
7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, plus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,
As usual at PSLV, there it goes. In fact, this mission carrying only 3 Indian satellites. Most of the load here is nanosatellites from other nations, including 96 from the United States. The previous record holder, a Russian mission which put 37 satellites into orbit just a few years ago. Let's go live to Delhi now. The BBC's Sanjay Majumdar has been watching the launch. Sanjay, this is a big moment for India.
Absolutely, Mike. As you know, India has had a very successful space program. It's really created a reputation for being a very reliable space launcher, but a low-cost alternative to existing international players. And I was speaking to people yesterday, people who follow sort of space science very closely, and they were trying to explain to me why this launch was so significant. It's not just the fact that it's so many satellites up on one rocket, but the fact that it's so complex. You have to ensure that even though these are very small satellites, that they don't collide while they're being launched. It's a very, very complex procedure, and that's why everyone associated with the launch, the scientists, have been so anxious about it.
Yes, I know India has been pressing ahead. This whole business of putting commercial satellites into space for a fee has been growing, hasn't it? China and Japan also outlining bold space plans.
Yes, that's right. Many people are saying that if it was the Russians and the Americans in the 60s, well, now it's the Indians and the Chinese, really, who are the new sort of space rivals, if you will. If you remember, in 2013, India sent a satellite to Mars at a fraction of the cost of a similar satellite that was sent by the United States, by NASA. I think it was a tenth of the cost. And there was a joke that, the Hollywood movie Gravity cost 4 times more than the Indian satellite launch. And it really underlines how strongly India's sort of approached this whole lucrative commercial market, basically allowing countries to take advantage of its technology, but also the fact that it's being offered at a very, very competitive price.
Sanjay, thank you very much for that. Those pictures on your screen now, live from the Sriharikota Space Centre in the southern Indian state of Andhra Pradesh. They've just launched a rocket carrying a record number of satellites into space, 104 satellites on a single mission. This is BBC News, broadcasting to our viewers in North America and around the globe.
This vehicle carries a 700-kilogram main satellite for Earth observation and 103 smaller nano-satellites, which weigh a combined 660 kilograms. Nearly all the nano-satellites are from other countries, including Israel, Kazakhstan, the Netherlands, Switzerland, and the United Arab Emirates. 96 are from the United States. The business of putting commercial satellites into space for profit is growing. India is competing with other international players for a greater share of that launch market and is...
And India's space research organization said the rocket blasted off half an hour ago from the southern spaceport of Sriharikota. And the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle carries a 700-kilogram main satellite for Earth observation and 103 smaller nano-satellites, which weigh a combined 660 kilograms. Nearly all of the nano-satellites are from other countries, including Israel, Kazakhstan, and the Netherlands, Switzerland, and United Arab Emirates, and 96 are from the United States. If successful, India will set a world record as the first country to launch the most satellites in one go, surpassing Russia, which launched 39 satellites in a single mission in June 2014. And the business of putting commercial satellites into space for profit is growing, and India is competing with other international players for a greater share of that launch market and is known for its low-cost space program. Last June, India set a national record after it successfully launched a rocket carrying 20 satellites, including 13 from the US. And in 2013, it sent an unmanned rocket to orbit Mars at a cost of just $70 million, compared with NASA's Maven Mars mission, which had a $670 million price tag.
3, 2, 1, 0.
It's a boost for India's space program. At the tip of this rocket, there are 104 satellites. It's the biggest number ever carried by a single launch.
The science and technology has been always at the center focus since India got independence in 47. So India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru had put space, atomic energy and other issues as a key focus area.
This is the Polar Satellite Launch Vehicle. It holds one big satellite which will be used to observe the Earth. The rocket's also carrying 103 much smaller satellites. 96 of them are from the US. But India's Space Administration, known as ISRO, says it's not dependent on US business.
In this launch itself, India has launched a satellite right from Switzerland to Kazakhstan to Israel to UAE and many other countries. So there are many countries which are knocking on the door of ISRO to launch their satellites.
India's launch program is famously low cost. It sent an unmanned rocket to orbit Mars in 2013 for just $73 million. NASA's Mars mission cost $671 million. India is campaigning hard to get a bigger share of the world's commercial satellite market, and being cheaper is likely to help. Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said a rocket that launched 4 foreign satellites in 2014 cost less to make than a Hollywood blockbuster movie. Rob Matheson, Al Jazeera.
See it there. India broke, you've been hearing this probably, broke this world record today, successfully launching 104 satellites in one go. Small ones. Up into space. India's commercial launch operations, look, they're much cheaper than in any other country, and it has been creating a thriving ecosystem for privately funded space programs. Shubha Khan, she went to Bangalore to visit Team Indus, who are taking part in a competition to send a spacecraft and a robot to the moon.
It's a race to the moon to put a privately funded spacecraft on the lunar surface. And India's Team Indus is one of the 5 finalists. They're betting the robot will get there first. So this is Ika. It's a small 4-wheeled rover built by Team Indus. This is meant to simulate the moon's surface, and I'm going to try and control this with my phone. And if I manage to do it, it's not meant to be fast. Its top speed is 5 centimeters per second. But if it successfully does this for 500 meters on the moon's surface, it stands to win a prize of $20 million. The team is taking part in the Lunar X Prize Challenge, funded by Google. It signed a deal to hitch a ride on one of the Indian government's rockets. Mission control is already in place. Target launch date, December this year.
Once we accomplish this, once we've proven what we can do by way of design, by way of integration, by way of prototyping, I think we will be able to turn around and offer these products and services to other folks who might be interested in space exploration, aerospace asset development, and so on and so forth.
They'll have tough competition. 4 other teams are also in the race. Israel's SpaceCell, American Moon Express, Synergy Moon, and Japan's Hakuto have also secured contracts to launch their spacecraft. Going to the moon is not cheap. Team Indus says their mission costs about $60 million. So even if they win, they've still lost money. But the prestige and national glory is priceless. Shilpa Kannan, BBC News, Bangalore in southern India.
Amazing. Let me just leave you with some other stories making headlines around the world. Samsung's big boss, its chief executive, faces a potential arrest.
Новый космический рекорд установила Индия. Ракета-носитель «Полар» вывела в космос 104 спутника единовременно. Ракета стартовала с космодрома на юге Индии. Общий вес аппаратов составил почти 1,5 тонны. Больше половины этой массы пришлась на основной спутник зондирования Земли. И, кроме того, ракета вывела на орбиту еще 103 наноаппарата. Из них 96 принадлежат США, остальные – Казахстану, Израилю, Нидерландам, Швейцарии и Объединенным Арабским Эмиратам. Предыдущий рекорд принадлежал нашей стране. В 2014-м Россия единовременно запустила 39 спутников.
Индия одной ракетой запустила на орбиту сразу 104 спутника. Запуск стал рекордным по количеству устройств, отправленных в космос одновременно. Предыдущий рекорд, 37 спутников, принадлежал России. Он был установлен в 2014 году. Из 104 спутников только 3, собственно, индийские. Остальные принадлежат Соединенным Штатам, Казахстану, Израилю, Нидерландам, Швейцарии и Объединенным Арабским Эмиратам. Отмечу, что Индия в последнее время расширяет свое присутствие в сфере коммерческих запусков спутников. Этот рынок оценивается в $300 миллиардов. Клиентов прежде всего привлекает относительная дешевизна запуска.
India now has launched 104 satellites on board a single rocket, setting what its space agency calls a new world record. Almost all the satellites are foreign-owned and will serve international customers. It's part of India's plan to gain a bigger chunk of the $300 billion global space industry. Ben Tornquist reports.
2, 1, 0, +1.
A countdown to an historic record. India's PSLV rocket carried 104 satellites into space, along with the pride of millions of Indians. In less than 10 minutes, all 101 foreign-owned satellites were released into space. each travelling at a whopping velocity of 27,000 kilometres per hour, or about 30 times the speed of an average passenger plane. But of the 104 satellites, only 3 are Indian. The chief of the Indian Space Agency says they're not in the game for setting records.
So it's not whether we are crossing somebody else, what they have put or what we have put as a record. It's primarily about improving our capability to maximize our returns.
India sold space for 600 kilos on its rocket for more than $100 million, making it one of the most commercially successful launches ever. The agency's relatively low prices attracted international customers to launch 75 satellites through it last year, cost around 20 to 30% less than the Chinese launch satellites. India is considered new to the multi-billion-dollar satellite launcher market, but with this latest mission, it has surely set an enviable benchmark. India now plans to send a maiden voyage to Venus in a few years. Ben Tornquist, TRT World.
Now, India's space agency has released some amazing footage of the way satellites are put up into space. A record 104 satellites went into orbit on Wednesday. The number broke the previous record that was held by Russia. Now, if we can see these pictures, it only took 30 minutes to eject them from orbit. There we go. The satellites are being rejected from the Indian-owned rocket. Now, there are 104 satellites, as I said, 103 are foreign-owned. One of them will be used by India. They'll be used to map traffic and, of course, keep an eye on the weather. Enjoy these pictures. Your headlines will be up next.
Now, finally, India has successfully set a record by launching 104 satellites into orbit at the same time.
2, 1, 0, plus 1, 2, 3, 4.
Now, the rocket carrying them took off from the southern spaceport of Saharikota. It held a 714-kilogram satellite and 103 nano-satellites. Among their uses, the satellites will monitor roads and create maps for water distribution. Most of them are owned by the United States. Russia held the previous record by launching 37 satellites in 2014. Well, for more on this, our TRT World science reporter Surav Roy joins us now in the studio. It's quite a sizable jump from that Russian number to this latest launch by India. What does this mean for the Indian Space Agency?
It is indeed a huge accomplishment. But in terms of science, it is not just taking up 103 or 104 satellites up into space. It's also successfully deploying them in orbit, which means a lot of complicated math and a lot of complicated physics into it. And that by itself is a huge accomplishment, to have 103 satellites being deployed in formation, such that all of them, as you rightly said, are nanosatellites. All of them are flying together in a formation in unique orbits. That by itself is a huge accomplishment. The Indians are not looking at setting record. They're looking at maximizing their capacity, which means that they're looking at pushing the next frontier. What could be the next frontier for them?
And what could be the next frontier for them? What are they looking at?
Well, they've already sent the world's cheapest yet the most successful Mars mission, known as Chandrayaan. They've sent a very successful mission to the moon called as Mangalyaan. They're now looking at trying out the GSLV, the Geosynchronous Satellite Launch Vehicle. in the months to come. They're looking at sending more missions to Mars, to Moon, as well as to Jupiter and Saturn as well. And if one has to go by what the space agency ISRO says, the Indian Space Agency, they're looking at one launch a month. Now that means a huge amount of science and technology, research and development taking place within the agency.
And just how big an achievement is this? We've touched on the figures. Why exactly are they spending so much money, putting so much effort into this?
Because it's, like I said earlier, it's not about the money. It's testing your capacity versus your knowledge of science. Now, we all know that there are many space nations who have the ability to send rockets as well as satellites into space, but ISRO, the Indian Space Research Organization, is by far the most successful space agency, given the fact that it hasn't had any major or any massive failures in the last 10 years. It has had some of its accomplishments, some of them minor, some of them major, but yeah, this is a huge accomplishment for them in the long run.
Okay, fascinating stuff. Saurav Roy, thank you very much, as always.
A countdown to an historic record. India's PSLV rocket carried 104 satellites into space, along with the pride of millions of Indians. In less than 10 minutes, all 101 foreign-owned satellites were released into space, each travelling at a whopping velocity of 27,000 kilometres per hour, or about 30 times the speed of an average passenger plane. But of the 104 satellites, only 3 are Indian. The chief of the Indian Space Agency says they're not in the game for setting records.
So it's not whether we are crossing somebody else, what they have put or what we have put as a record. It's primarily about improving our capability to maximize our returns.
India sold space for 600 kilos on its rocket for more than $100 million, making it one of the most commercially successful launches ever. The agency's relatively low prices attracted international customers to launch 75 satellites through it last year, cost around 20 to 30% less than the Chinese launch satellites. India is considered new to the multi-billion-dollar satellite launcher market, but with this latest mission, it has surely set an enviable benchmark. India now plans to send a maiden voyage to Venus in a few years. Ben Tornquist, TRT World.
One, zero, plus 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well, the rocket blasted into orbit from the southern spaceport of Sriharikota. It's carrying a 714-kilogram satellite and 103 nanosatellites. Among their many uses will be to monitor roads and create maps for water distribution.
Zero.